We will not receive even one Muslim.
Islam is a lie. The Quran is poison. This is what the Dutch politician Joram van Claveren used to say. He was a member of a strong anti-Islamic political party in the Netherlands, People's Party for Freedom. But when he set out to write a book to criticize Islam, his beliefs shifted 180, and he ended up embracing Islam. But what changed, and how? This is the story of how a fierce critic became a believer. Chapter 1. His background. Joram van Claveren was a born Protestant Christian, and just like many, he read the Bible, went to church, believed in God, heaven and hell, and all the differences that separated Christians from Muslims. Van Claveren was born on the 23rd of January 1979 in Amsterdam. Just like you and I, he also had a few confusions about his religions, like Jesus being eternal but also dying, him being the Son of God, but also the God himself. And to find answers, he took comparative religion in university and reached out to other priests and read books, but he couldn't figure it all out. As he got older, van Claveren started to question other religions, especially Islam. His views were influenced by events in his life. His first day at university was September 11th, 2001, and his fear towards Islam only grew. Later, when filmmaker Theo van Gogh was murdered in the streets of Amsterdam by a Muslim extremist, van Claveren became even more convinced that Islam was dangerous. Feeling the need to protect his country, van Claveren decided to go into politics. He wanted to fight against what he saw as a global threat, and so he became an educator and member of multiple political parties that opposed immigration, security, and the integration of Muslim communities. Chapter 2. His political career. He was someone who wanted Islam banned from his country. His beliefs were heavily influenced by the growing anti-Islam sentiment in Europe. His work specifically included anti-Islam sentiments. He shared heavy criticism that revolved around his efforts to challenge the faith. He believed that Islam was incompatible with Western values, the values that revolved around democratic principles and human rights. According to the old van Claveren, Quran and Islamic law, Sharia were violent and oppressive. He often argued that Islamic teachings promoted extremism. And that was right from his view, because that is what the media portrayed: anger, violence, fear, and suppression. He felt that Islamic teachings posed a threat to European culture and gender equality, and their set of values was a threat to the liberal societies. And so, van Claveren actively worked to critique and challenge Islam, especially its presence in Europe. Chapter 3. The Anti-Islamic Book. This led him to write a book. His book, Islam, What the West Needs to Know, was an effort to provide evidence and arguments to support these beliefs, a compilation of arguments and examples that would support the party's stance. When van Claveren started his research, he found that the doubts he had about his religion were answered in an Islamic way. He conducted extensive research on Islamic teachings, the Quran, and the experiences of Muslim communities. He drew a comparative analysis between the two concepts of God, the Christian concept and the Muslim concept, Tawheed, oneness of God. In his mind, he needed to challenge what he perceived as the differences in Islam, hoping to solidify his own belief in Christianity. He revisited the Bible, hoping to find answers that would defend his views, but that did not happen. The Old Testament was clear: there is but one God, and so he moved to the New Testament. The story narrated in it was of a man who came to Jesus asking about the most important thing in life. Jesus replied, "O Israel, your God is one," followed by the command to love your neighbor as yourself. That moment marked a turning point. The concept of one God was clear for once in life. It totally made sense. And he read more books and more, but the concept did not deviate. It only became more solid. Chapter 4: What Shifted His Beliefs. Van Claveren reached out to other professors and experts because he wanted to get a more accurate understanding of Islam. As someone writing an anti-Islam book, he had many doubts and questions. And instead of relying on biased sources or his only personal beliefs, he decided to engage directly with scholars who could provide a more informed perspective. And so he reached out to Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, a professor at Cambridge. It was weird for him. He, a politician, was asking a Muslim scholar for help while writing a book to criticize Islam. He told the professor his concerns. Islam promotes terrorism, is anti-woman, anti-Christian, and more. Murad humbly responded with a detailed email, answering his direct questions and recommending books and other resources to explore. As he read and compared stories from the Old Testament with those of Prophet Muhammad, he realized that his arguments against Islam started to fade. He couldn't deny the similarities between the prophets. The objections he had, like Muhammad having multiple wives, seemed weak when compared to figures in the Old Testament who had more wives. Over time, he couldn't ignore the evidence. If Moses was accepted as a prophet, why not Muhammad? The doubts still clouded, but his study had shifted his perspective. One of the turning points for Van Claveren was when Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad advised him to read books written by Muslims, not just the anti-Islamic stuff he'd been reading. This helped him understand the faith from its own sources, not through the lens of criticism. So Van Claveren started reading books by Islamic scholars, and it opened up a whole new perspective for him. One book that really changed things for him was The Life of the Prophet by Martin Links. Before this, Van Claveren had always seen Prophet Muhammad as a warlord, just another figure in history who fought and conquered. But after reading the book, he saw Muhammad in a completely different light, as a father, a teacher, a friend. The more he read, the more he realized that Muhammad's character was far more complex and compassionate than he had imagined. And then he came across the story of Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan. Hind had been involved in the death of the Prophet's beloved uncle, Hamza. Imagine the anger and pain the Prophet must have felt. But years later, when Hind came before him, instead of seeking revenge or punishment, the Prophet forgave her. He didn't want bloodshed or hatred. Instead, he gave her the option to stay with the Muslims if she chose to. Van Claveren was stunned by this. To forgive someone who had caused such immense personal pain, that was a level of character and mercy he wasn't used to seeing in history, ever. Up until then, he'd been certain about Islam being violent and intolerant. But these stories of mercy, wisdom, and understanding, made him question everything he thought he knew. By the end of his research, he had started seeing the world differently. Chapter 5. His Shada Van Claveren thought to himself, "This is the kind of person who could be a prophet." But then he froze, realizing what that meant. "I already accept the oneness of God," he thought. "But if I say Muhammad is a prophet, that's basically the Shahada." It was almost too much to accept in one moment. He needed to pause and process. So, he pushed the books aside, hoping to halt this process. It was too much to take in. While putting the books on a shelf, one of them fell off. It was the Quran. He opened it randomly, and his eyes landed on Surah 22, Ayah 46, which reads, "It's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts." Van Claveren was taken aback. He realized that it wasn't his vision that was clouded, it was his heart. Despite all the evidence, despite everything he had written and discovered, he couldn't accept that Muhammad, Pibao, was the prophet. It was his ego, his nafs, holding him back. At that moment, Van Claveren made a prayer. "God, give me a sign. something to make me 100% sure. He went to bed that night feeling conflicted, but woke up with an undeniable sense of peace. The anxiety and doubt vanished. And at that moment, he knew. I think I'm a Muslim now. Chapter 6. The reaction. Now, of course, telling others was a whole different story. His family, especially his mother, took it hard. Some of his relatives were shocked. Some of his old supporters, those who had voted for him, turned on him completely. He received over 2,000 death threats, threats against his family, his children, the kind of violence that can only come from people hiding behind screens. It was an intense time for him, but it wasn't all negative. His wife was surprisingly open about it. She said, "Islam is what you believe, and that's between you and God." Van Claveren explained, "Before I became Muslim, I never chose a religion. I was born into Christianity, and I'm thankful for all the good it gave me. But becoming Muslim was my choice, and it was the most rational decision I've ever made." The way he describes it, it was where everything else faded away, and the truth that he had been searching for became undeniable. Chapter 7. Life after conversion. Life after converting to Islam was a full new way of life, and moments of peace. One of the most memorable experiences for him was performing Salah for the first time. Bowing down completely in prayer was humbling and made him feel deeply connected to Allah. This act of worship brought a happiness that stayed with him. Praying 5 times a day, eating halal food, and living with constant reminders of Allah seemed difficult. But once he embraced these practices, they became a natural and meaningful part of his life. At home, there was a unique mix of faiths. His wife, a Christian, showed her support by cooking halal meals for the whole family. This created a peaceful and loving environment. His children experienced both faiths, asking their mother about Christianity and their father about Islam. He started the Islamic Experience Center, which helps others learn about Islam in a fun and interactive way, including through virtual reality. By visiting schools and organizations, he works to clear up the false ideas people may have about Islam. Like when a student asked if Islam fits with modern life, he explained that the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a perfect example of how to live with kindness, justice, and balance. He encourages others to learn about Islam through trusted books like Martin Ling's Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources, instead of relying on the internet. Chapter 8. Border implications. Van Claveren's conversion to Islam had a noticeable impact on Dutch society and political conversations. As a former member of the PVV, his decision sparked discussions. Many compared his journey to that of Arnoud van Doorn, another ex-PVV member who also embraced Islam. His career at the PVV had already ended in 2014, when he began questioning the party's extreme stance on Islam. He found it increasingly difficult to conform his personal beliefs with the PVV's anti-Islam expression. His departure was met with mixed reactions from his colleagues. Some dismissed him as disloyal, while others expressed disappointment over his change in perspective. After his conversion to Islam, the reactions ranged from shock to criticism, with some accusing him of betraying the party's ideals. However, his story also inspired conversations about the importance of personal growth and the courage to stand by one's convictions, even when it means walking away from a successful political career. Joram van Claveren's journey reminds us of the incredible power of self-reflection and open-mindedness. As the Quran beautifully states, indeed, Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:11. That's all for today's video, and thanks for watching it. Let me know in the comments below if you found this story inspiring. Until next time, take care and stay tuned.